All right, let's talk about money, but probably not in the way you're used to. We're going to dive into a new kind of capital, one that's designed to fix some of our most stubborn, frustrating problems. Things like failing infrastructure or scientific progress that just stalls out. It's a question I bet you've asked yourself, right? Why does it feel like our most critical systems are always failing? The stuff we count on for safety, for progress, for our communities, it just seems like they're constantly on the brink of collapse. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. We've all seen the headlines, the climate pumps that fail right before a massive flood, or brilliant scientists who are stuck unable to do their work because a key piece of lab equipment is basically a museum piece, and there's just no budget to replace it. Well, it turns out this isn't just a string of bad luck. It's actually a fundamental design flaw in how we fund these things. So let's get to the root of it. Let's diagnose this thing. I think a good way to frame it is what we can call the broken clock problem. Okay, so this slide just lays out the core conflict perfectly. On one hand, you have what we'll call mission cycles. This is the natural long-term rhythm of the actual work. Think about a flood pump. It's built to last, say, 10 to 15 years. That's its cycle. But on the other hand, you have the fragility cycles. This is the frantic, short-term rhythm of the money that's supposed to support it, driven by things like two-year political budgets or super volatile financial markets. You see the problem, right? Our missions are running a marathon, but our funding is stuck in a series of desperate sprints. And that's the whole point. This clash of timelines, what the research calls temporal misalignment, it isn't an accident. It's not random. It actually creates a predictable cycle, a pattern where things are almost guaranteed to fall apart over time. It doesn't even matter how well you manage them. And you know what makes this misalignment even worse? The financial tools we're trying to use. Let's dig into why they're just not the right fit for the job. Okay, so our standard financial toolkit, it's just not built for this kind of long-term mission. Think about it. A grant? It's like a disposable battery. You get a big jolt of power, which is great, but once it's used up, it's gone. You're right back at zero. Debt? That's like a high-stakes loan breathing down your neck, demanding payments on a rigid schedule that has nothing to do with the real-world needs of the project. And equity? Well, equity is like a demanding business partner who's only there to extract value as fast as possible. So each one of these tools in its own way actually makes the whole system more fragile. So this leads to the big what-if question. Instead of trying to force these crucial long-term projects to dance to the frantic short-term rhythm of our money, what if we could design capital that actually matched the mission's rhythm? And that brings us to a really powerful new idea, a whole new class of capital that's designed specifically to solve this timing problem. It's called perpetual social capital, or PSC for short. And you really have to think of it as a totally different kind of tool. It's not a loan, so there's no debt. It's not an investment looking for a return, so it's non-extractive. The whole point is that it's designed to stay and to regenerate. The best way to picture it, it's like a self-recharging solar battery. It gives you steady, reliable power, and then it just tops itself back up, always ready for the next cycle. And that right there is the fundamental shift. The whole goal of this kind of capital isn't to be spent and then disappear. Its purpose is to stick around, to stay inside the system, providing that long-term stability, cycle after cycle after cycle. Okay, so how does this actually work in practice? How do you get that kind of stability? Well, it all boils down to two really simple but powerful principles. First up is decoupling. This is basically building a firewall. You completely insulate the capital from those short-term shocks we talked about, political budgets, volatile markets. Its behavior is no longer tied to an election cycle or a quarterly report. And the second principle is alignment. This is where you synchronize the money's timing with the mission's actual long-term needs. So if a piece of equipment needs to be replaced every 7 years, the capital shows up on a 7-year cycle. It's really that simple, and at the same time, completely radical. And this quote here, it really gets to the heart of the paradigm shift. See, in our current economy, price is everything, right? It decides who gets what right now, instantly. But with PSC, the main organizing force isn't price, it's timing. That cycle constitution it mentions, that's just a fancy way of saying there's a set of pre-agreed rules that make sure the money flows when it's needed for the long haul, not just where the price is highest at this very moment.
All right, that all sounds great in theory, but what does this actually look like in the real world? Let's get concrete.
Let's take climate adaptation. The problem, as we said, is a flood pump that lasts 15 years is funded by grants tied to, say, a 3-year political cycle. That's a textbook timing mismatch. So the PSC solution, you deploy the capital on a steady 10 or 15-year cycle. It's perfectly aligned with when the pump needs to be renewed, and it's completely disconnected from who happens to be in office. Or how about scientific research? A critical piece of lab equipment might have a useful life of, let's say, 4 or 5 years, but it's being funded by these frantic one-year research grants. That forces labs into this constant state of anxiety and decay. The PSU solution here? You deploy capital on a 5-year cadence, so right when the equipment is getting old, boom, the resources are there to replace it. No gaps, no interruptions. And this isn't just for big infrastructure. It works at the community level too. I mean, we've all seen it, right? A local project gets a huge wave of donor excitement, but then that attention fades and the project slowly decays. PSC can create a permanent regenerative pool of capital that decouples those community assets from the whims of donor interest. It ensures that the playground or the community center is actually maintained for the long haul. So, when you put it all together, what we're really talking about is a fundamental choice. A choice about the kind of future we want to build. And this chart, it lays that choice out pretty starkly. We can stick with the status quo, with extractive capital, and just accept the predictable decay and fragility it creates. Or we can choose to build with regenerative capital and create systems that have stability and resilience baked right into their DNA from the very beginning. And that's really the big takeaway here. The goal isn't just to throw money at problems. It's to fundamentally change their rhythm, to shift them from being fragile and prone to breaking to being regenerative and built to last. And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. If we can fix these kinds of problems just by changing the timing of our capital, what else could we fix? What other massive, seemingly impossible challenges could we solve if we just change the very rhythm of our economy?